Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about track structure. Somebody in the comments asked me how you would go about laying out your track structure and making sure that it holds up with the tracks that you hear professionals make. What I've done is I have taken a track of mine and we're going to explore how I made the structure there, and we'll also explore the structure of a very popular track, which is Deep Jungle Walk by Astrix. And the reason I chose that track is I'm doing a remake of that track, and I wanted to therefore also, get the structure of that track. So yeah, that remake is also going to become some content in the future. I'm going to explore that project a little bit and see if there are some cool sound design things happening there. Which should be really interesting. But for now, we'll just take a look at the differences in structure between my track and Deep Jungle Walk. If you haven't heard Deep Jungle Walk, I highly recommend you listening to it. It's one of the psytrance classics. I'll leave a link in the description, but I'm pretty sure you've already heard it. So yeah, let's get right into it. Okay, so first I want to generally talk about how I go through and kind of set up my structure in general for a track. So usually when I'm starting to produce, I start off with my kick and bass, which I make really quickly. I tend to kind of come back to the kick and bass later once I have some sounds that kind of sit nicely on top of that. And then I'll go into the intro and start writing down some ideas for the intro. For this particular intro, I had the idea of doing something with an ARP, and the ARP sounds like this. So that's the ARP that I'm using here. And what I do, I kind of lay it out first of all in the length I want my intro to be a little, let's say I want my intro to be up until bar 32, so 32 bars long, which is a nice starting point. It kind of gets you around 50 seconds into the track. Normally intros are between for these longer psytrance tracks, the more full-on tracks, they tend to be around a minute long, maybe a little bit more. Some are a little bit less, but they tend to have a nice long intro. So I do that, I just lay it out, and then I start sectioning my track. So what I'll do is I have this marker track up here where I write down different sections. So for example, here we have the intro section, the intro is green. Then we have a little bit of a pre-drop section, which I've made yellow or blue, sorry. I'm not Crawler Bryant, I swear. And then the next one is this drop here, which I just made red. And as you can see, they're all blocks of just basically the same size. You can see, for example, this is 16 bars, and then the next one will also be 16 bars. And that's because those numbers tend to work well for structures. Because they're even numbers and they're multiples of 4. They work well with the 4 and the 4 feeling of the track. And so you might have sections of 8 bars or more commonly of 16 bars in psytrance. And then I kind of start working out the track and doing some different things. And as I go through the track and start adding more stuff, I tend to lay out my vision for the structure ahead of me. So for example, you can see that all the structure is already planned here for the rest of the track, even though there's nothing here. So the way I do that sometimes is I use a reference track. In this case, you can see I can kind of focus the reference track very much in the first part. I kind of copied the structure over up until this point here. You can see we have this little outro thingy, and then we have that twice more. And here I decided to do one of those outros where you can see the kick and bass. And then right here, we don't have them anymore, and this is just a breakdown. So sometimes I'll follow a reference track completely. Sometimes I will follow a reference track just partially, like here. And sometimes I'll just make something up for myself and just see where it goes. But I always tend to plan the structure before I actually start writing there. That way I have some clear guidelines. But what I've discovered lately, and something I should probably get into myself a lot more, is that having everything pre-planned and predetermined, and very solid, very normal structure might not be the best approach. We can already see here that this track, which is the Shiva by Avalon and Wayo, uses a lot of 8-bar sections as well. As you can see, we have 8 bars and then a little fill at the end, and then we have another 8 bars there, while also using 16 bars. And what you can see in my track is that we almost exclusively have these 16 bars here. So that's something I should personally get into as well, and it's something I've not been doing as much as I should. But yeah, you can definitely see that the professionals tend to play a lot more with the lengths of their sections than beginning producers. So the tip there, and something I'm probably going to do from now on, is to start using sections from different lengths, but keeping them as divisions. So for example, we'll have a 16 bar sections, and then 8 bar or 4 bar or 2 bar or 1 bar or 32 bars. So they're always divisions or multiples. So that's what I saw when analyzing this track actually, with is that there's a lot of different sections, and also that there's some areas where the fill is very long. So for example, this is based off the fill we see right here. So this is a 4-bar fill. You cannot really see it, but basically what's happening is that towards here there's a high pass filter, and most of the elements kind of drop out by the time we're here, but it already starts happening at this bar. And then we have 2 bars of kind of almost a build-up, and then another bar of like a fill element, and then the drop comes back in. I'm not going to play it because of copyright things, which is obviously a problem. We don't want to get copyright claims here on this channel. So you kind of have to believe me. And if you want to listen to the track, I'll put links to this track as well as Deep Jungle Walk, which we'll go into in a little bit. But yeah, those are some basic things you can do, is having segments that are like multiples or divisions of your 16 bar section, and using that as a fill. As you can see here, this is 4 bars long, so that's a nice division of 16. And that works well because you can use 2 for a small breakdown, maybe 1 for build-up, and then 1 for fill, like I've been doing in this case. I'll let you hear what this sounds like in the track. So I'll play it from here so you have an idea. You can hear that we have this breakdown, and then we have the bass sweep kind of announcing that we have something new coming, and that new thing is this build-up here, which I've done with kicks, and then we have a final fill with that synth element coming in towards the end here to announce the new section. So something you should probably notice from that little thing is that there's always something announcing a change. So here we have maybe a reverse crash, and that bass thing coming up in volume. Then we have the kicks coming up. We have this kicks kind of signifying the end of it at the new bar. Gives it one less punch before the build-up stops, and then right before we have a new section, I introduce a new element to kind of announce that section. This is a way to help listeners to just kind of go through the track and not be lost in the different sections, even though it's very precise, the sections. It's all 16 bars. If you were to make this longer, then again this would be a section of 16 bars, but we'll not do that just for now. It's still very important that you guide the people through the sections. So even if you have, as I said here, a very specific, very precise sectioning thing, it's very important that the transitions between the sections work out nicely, and that they actually help the listener go through the track. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Just having your sections laid out like this won't make it a lot better. You actually need to work on going from this section to this section with some transitions. But what I wanted to show and focus on mainly is where an artist like Astrix deviates from this whole idea and starts working with very odd numbers, very odd structures of the track. And here I've pulled up Deep Jungle Walk. As I said, it's the track that I'm working on right now to do a remake of. Unfortunately, I cannot play it here, again for copyright issues, but you'll just have to bear with me, and I think most of you have heard this track before. So it starts off very nicely. We have the intro, and then it kind of comes up here to a high point, and then it kind of stalls out. So what he'll do is he'll build up to a certain point, and then the drop isn't really there yet, so he'll strip down some of the elements, turn some of the elements down a little bit, and then bring up one core element, and in this case it's that iconic vocal chant coming through, and that will carry you to the drop, and then we have a transition here, and then the drop starts. So up until that point it's all fairly normal, and it follows a nice 16 bar structure, and here we have 32 bars of like a building up intro, and here we have the 16 bars. But then we come to this drop, and you can already see that there's something happening here. If we count out 16 bars, you can see that there's actually another one here. So this is a drop which is 17 bars long, and the reason why I say 17 and not maybe do something like this is because if we listen to the actual track, you can hear that there's an impact and a fill here, and here everything starts to change. And up until this point, the drop stays fairly similar. So this is the point where in his structure things start to change, and he starts to introduce new elements, and in this case that's a build up to the drop here. You can also see it because this drop starts a beat later, so it's off grid from the Ableton grid, whereas this one is on the exact Ableton grid. If you look at the colors, you can see that this one is different from this one, is different from this one, and then it's different from this one, and then here he goes off that grid, and if we select the colors here, you can see that he stays off that grid. So he will add like a bar of extra drop in there just to keep things interesting, I guess. I've never really heard it when I was just listening to it, but now that I've analyzed it and I've heard it, every time I listen to it again, it's obviously there, and it really helps the track stand out a little bit because it's so different from what you would normally do. So that's something you might be able to play with, and it happens throughout the track a lot more. There's a lot more sections that aren't exact multiples of 16 or 8 or whatever sections he has in mind. So it's not so much about the actual math behind it and stuff like that. It's just more of making your track make sense in terms of transitioning, and making sure that there are at least multiples of 4 beats, not that you end up, for example, transitioning to here, which would be a little bit weird. Having 2 extra kicks is a lot weirder than having 4. That kind of makes sense because it's still a multiple of 4, so it still works with the 4/4 type beat a little bit at least. So that's something you might want to try out, is to kind of get a little bit odd with the structures. Maybe analyze a few tracks of your own, and kind of lay out a MIDI pattern like this. Sometimes I'll just use like a MIDI pattern like this, named and everything, to write my own track on it. And sometimes I'll copy certain parts of the structure or stuff like that. So if you want better structures, what I would suggest doing is something like the reference track, just copying the structure and then adjusting your track to that. And obviously you don't have to copy it one-on-one. You can move it around a little bit and play with it. Maybe you want your third drop, which is a little bit short, you want that to be a little bit longer, or you want your intro a bit shorter, then you can always do that. But having a feel for what works well in terms of structures for sidetrans tracks, I would suggest just opening up a reference track and seeing what works, and seeing where things happen in that track, and just do a few to get a feeling of it, and then you will be able to make structures of your own. Obviously it takes a lot of time to get to something like this. You can see that this is a very complex structure, the way I've laid it out, and I am personally nowhere near that. As you can see, this is much more on the beat. The only deviation I have is that I have a little pre-drop here which offsets the rest of everything here, and that's just corrected in the fade out of the track. And what you can see is that actually all of these segments are still multiples of 16, and this was an 8 bar section, so it's not as complex as the tracks that are really popular. So that's also something I personally need to work on. And yeah, it's a thing that really only gets better with experience, and it's not something I can easily teach on tutorials. What I can do is what I just did, is kind of explaining how you can learn it, and I hope that is at least helpful for you in making your own structures for tracks. And if you have any further questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll be answering all of them, obviously. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe, and also consider entering my Discord server, where I have regular updates on both my YouTube channel as well as streaming, and we also talk production in general. So if you're interested in that, feel free to join there. And with that being said, I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.